New York landlords are begging a judge to end the eviction moratorium. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have another story for you out of the great state of New York. But before I get into the story, please hit that like and subscribe button, and I will continue to bring you stories about the eviction moratorium and other news relating to landlords and real estate investing. So this story comes to us from courthousenews.com, and it says, in emotional plea, landlords press judge to lift the New York eviction ban. A single mom and Air Force veteran says that New York State's eviction moratorium has stopped her from reclaiming a home from non-paying tenants and forced her to live with her ex-fiancé. Brandy Lacasse audibly choked up during her testimony in federal court Tuesday. She is one of four plaintiff property owners suing New York's court system to block enforcement of the statewide ban on evictions during the COVID-19 pandemic. Wow, talk about a bad situation. I mean, she had nowhere to go, so now she is forced to move back in with her ex-fiance. And I'm guessing it's because she was renting out a property. She can't remove those tenants from the property, and she had been planning on moving back into it. You know, it's a pretty common tactic, and I did it myself. You know, I lived in one of my rental properties that had 4 units, and, you know, I understand where she's coming from. As an Air Force veteran, I mean, you feel like, hey, you know, property owners should have more control over their property during this, and they should be able to remove bad tenants, and they're just not able to at this time. Along with the named plaintiff suing the state is the Rent Stabilization Association of New York City, a real estate industry trade group that says it represents 25,000 property owners. The organization's Housing Court Answers and Make the Road New York have also joined the suit. The plaintiffs say the ban violates both due process and free speech laws under the U.S. Constitution. The eviction stay has trampled on their constitutional rights, denied owners any benefit from their property, and freed tenants from any consequences for refusing to pay their rent, giving them carte blanche to overstay the expiration of their leases, even if their non-payment or lease expiration began before the pandemic, the plaintiffs say in their 49-page complaint filed in the Eastern District of New York. Yeah, that's another issue that I haven't really brought up much in my videos. A lot of these people, they were already in eviction proceedings before the pandemic began for any number of reasons, okay? And all of the evictions, even from before the pandemic, have been put on hold. So you could have a case of, especially in the state of New York where it takes several months to actually go through the eviction process, you could have a case of somebody who was in eviction proceedings 2 months before the pandemic began, and they hadn't actually been forced to move out of that property yet, but hey, guess what? The eviction moratorium occurred, and now they've spent an additional 15 months living rent-free in a property. And that isn't the way that this is supposed to be happening, okay? This has become a complete nightmare for small property owners especially, but for all property owners. Under the state eviction pause, landlords must give their tenants hardship declaration forms, which the tenant can then fill out if they're experiencing financial challenges because of the pandemic. That statute compels speech, the landlords say. But the First Amendment argument likely won't go anywhere with U.S. District Judge Gary Brown. Before parties even presented their cases Tuesday, Brown said he was not moved by the free speech claims, raising other examples of government-required messages like health warnings on cigarettes and mandatory fire exit signs. Yeah, so basically they are saying before you can even remove a tenant, you have to give them the form like, hey, you haven't paid your rent in a while. Here's a form. Please fill this out. They're saying that you can't pay your rent right now. I mean, that's completely ridiculous. If the tenant doesn't know about the eviction moratorium, which they should, but if they don't know about it, it's on them to fill out the forms. It's not on the landlord to try to force them to stay in their property. That's completely ridiculous. Instead, the landlord should be able to take their property back if the tenant is willing to leave. I can be dissuaded from anything, Brown said, but I spent a lot of time preparing. It was the due process argument that piqued the judge's interest, he said. The landlords argue that they don't have a fair method of challenging their tenants' declarations of financial hardship. Yeah, that's the biggest problem right there. Okay, if a tenant writes on that form that they have a financial hardship, how exactly is a landlord supposed to prove that they don't? Okay, they have no way of doing that. The tenant, the burden of proof should be on the tenant, not on the landlord. I mean, how are we supposed to know the tenant's finances? How are we supposed to know what the tenant is going through? I know for a fact that unemployment is available to tenants. I know for a fact that the federal government had a supplement to unemployment that was up to $600 a week extra, and now it's down to only $300 a week. And some states have completely gotten rid of that, but I know states like New York, they still have that extra federal supplement. I also know that there have been 3 separate stimulus checks, and people have gotten their tax returns, etc. There's no reason for a tenant to not have at least paid some of their rent in all of this time. I mean, this is completely out of line. But how is a landlord supposed to know the finances of the tenant and prove, hey, this tenant isn't in financial distress, this tenant did have the money to pay me? There's no way. So I mean, the eviction moratorium the burden of proof should be on the tenant to get that kind of relief, and it's not. They've had a deprivation of their property and their ability to live in their own property, said attorney Randy Mastro. He argued that post-deprivation remedies available don't make his clients whole. Even when the eviction ban passed in December 2020 and recently extended through the end of August is lifted, the hardship will be considered a rebuttable presumption in housing court, said Mastro of the firm Gibson Dunn. He said the government is essentially forcing his clients to say to their tenants, here's a form, check the box and you don't have to pay rent. Yeah, that's what they're doing. They're forcing landlords to say, here, check this box and you don't have to pay me. That's stupid, okay? It's just stupid. And they don't even realize how dumb that is and how much abuse of that system there can be from these tenants. Testifying for the state, Aliyah Razak, chief clerk of New York City Civil Court, said that around 100 eviction warrants have been issued since March of last year, an event that follows a 14-day notice from a landlord. Although Razak acknowledged the disputes between tenants and landlords can be lengthy, typically lasting between 4 and 6 months, she said matters involving eviction warrants will probably be first in line after the eviction ban has ended. Yeah, they've had over 100 eviction warrants issued since March of last year. And these are evictions that have already been approved by the courts, but they cannot carry out because of the eviction moratorium. So for the last 15 months or so, these people have been able to stay in these properties, probably not paying rent the entire time. And hopefully they will be the first ones that will be resolved after the eviction. They better be the first ones, kicked out of those properties after the eviction moratorium ends, because otherwise these landlords are just being 100% deprived of all of their property rights. And I wish that cases like this would just go up to the Supreme Court, because this is, unbelievable. Okay, it's unbelievable that you can be denied your property rights through these eviction moratoriums and not be made whole.